So thank you, Mallika. You were here last year about Rocket Boys, and now you're here about yourself. What should we call it? The Pataka girl, the Rocket girl. So as I mentioned to you while we were sitting in the author's lounge, most autobiographies tend to be stories of, how someone overcomes, and the triumph is what you're left with. But here it's called In Free Fall, and you are absolutely brutally honest about a lot of the experiments you've had that have made you the person you are and have not necessarily been great successes. So what was the thought behind collating these experiments of your life?
For many years now, I've been asked questions about how I look the way I do, how do I still have the energy to dance as much as I do, what is your regime, what do you eat, what do you not eat, what is your beauty regime, and so on and so forth. And I've always sort of laughed it off. And then COVID came, and it was the first time in my professional life that I actually had time on my hands. I had the beautiful campus of Darpana with peacocks and dogs and geese, and I thought, okay, let me sit and write it. It started off originally as, let me write about my health experiments. And then because so many of my health experiments were because of situations that arose in my private life, in my personal life, it became the kind of self-searching memoir that it is.
So the self-searching memoir, you've used the word experiments, which is what we typically use for science. So do you think a lot of the fame you got as a dancer and is your inheritance in some ways of your mother, but there's a curiosity that informs this book. So part of every experiment you've done is also your scientific brain. So can you talk us through this whole relationship you've had with food?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that but for the fact that when I was in first year college and wanted to do physics and chemistry, we had to cut frogs. And as a good vegetarian, that was something I could not conceive doing, which is why I didn't go into the sciences and went into the humanities instead. So there was every intention of going into the sciences. It's funny, this relationship one has with food. I was listening to the earlier session when Vikas was talking about Bengal and the Bengalis' love for food. And I, of course, come from the state, the other side, which has the same love for food. I mean, we talk about food all the time. My mother ate everything that we say just now is wrong. She had white bread, sugar, rice, potatoes, and very little else. She was a meat eater, primarily a chicken and a fish eater, married into a very Gujarati culture. Papa was fine with her eating, but apparently every time she was out with my aunts and they would see an animal on the road, they would say, "Do you feel like eating that cow?" And my mother never knew how to deal with this. So she ended up not eating. Papa, on the other hand, was a serious foodie but believed in health, and would start the morning off with drinking 4 glasses of water, then doing his Surya Namaskar, then going for a run. So when I did become conscious of not wanting to be the roly-poly who only ate, like my mother, white things, it was to Papa I turned. And it was at the age of about 12 or 13 that Papa started educating me about nutrition and how what you put into your mouth really affected the way you felt, the way the brain worked, and so on and so forth. So after that, it was a long period of experimenting, like so many anorexic people, and the term hadn't been born then. I used to see myself as much fatter than I was. I look at photographs of me at that age, and I'm really very thin. But I used to be convinced, so I had all these strange diets, like eating 4 treptins every meal, and having a glass of Complan all through my 2 years of IIM and so on. But that changed.
So, today we are at this point in our, as urban Indians, where lifestyle, wellness, this whole desire to lead a life which they glean out of Facebook and social media is what is deciding what we eat. So it is amazing to know that you also encountered things like bulimia and, as you said, anorexia way back then. So I mean, I don't know, you said you can ask me anything, so I am. Can you talk us through your misadventures with bulimia and why you stopped it?
Well, I didn't know. I mean, as I said, the words didn't exist. I was engaged to somebody who lived in Kenya and went to spend time with him. His house was being renovated, so we stayed at the home of their friends who happened to be very, very enterprising business people from Gujarat in Kenya. And I noticed that the lady of the house, who herself was a dashing entrepreneur, after every meal would disappear for 5 or 7 minutes and come back patting her face and looking very fresh. And after a few days, she said to me, "Do you not like the food here?" So I said, "No, I'm just terrified that I'll put on weight." And she said, "You should do what I do." And I said, "What is that?" And she said, "Well, after every meal, I go and throw it all up. And the only meal I keep inside is breakfast." And I said, "How on earth do you throw it up?" So she gave me like a 2-minute lesson in how to throw up. I tried it, and for the first few days, all I got is a very sore throat, and nothing came out. And then I made a science and an art out of it. So for the next 15, 20 years, that's how I stayed thin, I think. And then it came to a point when it was fine when you were in a private house and the bathroom was soundproof. But when it wasn't, and when you went into New York houses where the host had gone to great lengths to create a vegetarian menu for you, and then you ended up wanting to throw up and going into the bathroom and throwing up, and you came out and the entire party was like looking at you like this, and you know that that was not a soundproof bathroom. And it was very embarrassing, and unfortunately, that's how I stopped.
Okay, so yes, I mean, so this is the kind of brutal honesty and about all the crazy things that Mallika did in her growing and adult years that really makes this book absolutely gobsmacking. I have never seen such honesty about even things like Botox, which she did as a scientific experiment more than a vanity project.
Which was not a good experiment, so never done again.
Yes, but she just had to see what the fuss was all about. So this is the outer core you're dealing with in this book about how you tried to remain thin and how you had this relationship with food where you craved it, but you didn't like what it was doing to your body. But there is another aspect to this book, which is you question allopathy to a level and say, you're not a mad fan of quackism, but you are willing to integrate some parts of things like phototherapy and Ayurveda into your lifestyle. So as I said, wellness is this very, very commonly used and abused word nowadays. So in your experiments with things like phototherapy, how do you know what is quackism and where to draw the line?
You try it. You go into it with an open mind, but with a skepticism and cynicism. I have always believed that there can't be just one way of doing things. And the fact that things like Chinese medicine and our kitchen medicines, I mean, the fact that even today, if you get hurt, in most households, you'll dabao some haldi into it. And we used to say, oh, grandmother's remedy, not proved, and so on, till America patented haldi. And then we all sit up like the white colonialists that we are in our heads and take note. But it makes sense, doesn't it? You're talking of solar energy. And yet, on the other hand, we do Surya Namaskars, looking at it, what is the difference? One is proved by Western proof, and the other, we have lost the proof. I genuinely believe that a lot of the remedies and a lot of the philosophies that are coming back as health philosophies just now, it's just that we have forgotten the didactic proof. They have remained as things that we believe in, but we can no longer give the didactic proof. But India, instead of saying, let's research it, still runs after the West to prove something before we say, I mean, yoga has been around for years. It's only when Madonna and people started doing yoga that we suddenly sat up. Sitar has been around for years. Indian music has been around for years. But it's when the Beatles start going after Ravi Shankar and people that we suddenly say, oh, this must be not so bad. But there are so many things to experiment. And there are so many. I mean, there are books many hundred years old. And I remember my own nanny taking colored glass bottles, putting water, and leaving those bottles under the sunlight so that the water got infused by a certain color. Now today, chromatotherapy, which is one of the fastest growing therapies in Europe, which has scientific papers written about it, they've gone into mechanical devices that give you different colored spectrum and so on. It's the same thing. But because it has come with Euclidean theorem attached to it, we are accepting it. And I have to say that in all the experiments I did, in all the different therapies I've tried, I personally have never come up with a quack theory at all. And I think because I have made myself the guinea pig of so on, and I'm really talking about that, I think it's one of the values of the book is that you can actually see 10 different therapies that I myself have tried, and I'm talking about how it affected me and how it didn't. The mud therapy, the chromotherapy, the tomatis ear therapy. These are things that people would, I think, like to know about, because everybody is looking for an alternative to the pill popping that goes on, in the most part, in the name of allopathy.
So you have written, while doctors around the world who scoff at any form of alternative medicine, evidence notwithstanding, may call chromotherapy, quackism, and other names, in a world where more and more ancient wisdom is finding Western scientific proof, a time will come when this therapy will be accepted and practiced as yoga. So
yes, I think a lot of Indian medical practitioners stop researching and learning when they get their MBBS or FRCS or whatever. And reality in the world is changing so quickly. I mean, we have human beings who are not human, they're half AI. So, what is it that we are talking about? And unless you are open to taking all that in, you are going to become an anachronism. And that is what a lot of professionals in India are becoming, anachronistic, because they are not actually open to constant learning. And I think you asked about my scientific self. I think I'm very interested in all the sciences to do with brain and body and the mind and body connection. As a dancer, I need to be. As a dancer, I need to know that my body will work. If I go on stage, I can't be concerned about whether my stamina is going to hold up or not. Otherwise, I'm not performing. I'm there worrying about whether I'm going to last it or not. And I think that is what has driven the book and what drives my constant search to be able to listen to my body more and to be able to share that with people.
The other amazing thing, and I guess one of the high points of the Mallika story, is Draupadi in Peter Brook's Mahabharata. So you mentioned it about how you learned French. So again, that's something which I found a science we know so little about, and which you were so skeptical about, coming to you in a form that you thought was just garbled noise, and then teaching you a new language. So again, that's something, I mean, would you like to read it? Or
no,
would
I'll just share it. So when I was chosen to do Draupadi in the international production of the Peter Brook Mahabharata, I was the only one in the entire team who spoke no French whatsoever. And I had a 12-hour production to do with 5 men to argue with, so it was necessary to learn French quickly. And I started learning French. I started learning French from the script because I thought it was easiest if I just learned the script. And about a couple of months through the rehearsals, Peter Brook called me and he said, there's this center called Tomatis, and I'm going to enroll you in a course there for 3 weeks, just go. So I said, what is it about? Now, this is 30 years before the internet, so there was nothing you could refer to. So he said, no, just go. So I would go, I would sit there for an hour every morning. There were those of you who are old enough to have visited record shops and known the little booths in which we used to listen to records. There were booths like that with headphones, and you put on the headphone and you were not supposed to read or anything. So my son was 3 months old, so I used to sit and knit. But in one ear, I had like kind of sounds. And in the other, I had a similar version of Mozart. And it was only sort of 5 or 6 days through it that I realized that on the first ear was Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince. But with every nth consonant highlighted, and then it would go into silence, and then so it was very difficult to understand a single word. Except that by the 5th day, people in the rehearsal started noticing how much more correct my French pronunciations are. And I didn't know how this was working at all, and day by day, everybody was saying, "Mais tu parles couramment, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Qu'est-ce que tu fais?" And I said, "I don't know what I'm doing. I really don't know. I mean, I just sit in this thing." By the end of the 3 weeks, I was being told that I spoke French like a Parisian. So then I started finding out about it. So this was a French doctor called Dr. Tomatis, who specialized as an ENT specialist and was very interested in opera music. And one day, a patient came to him who was the most famous opera singer at the Paris Opera, and she had lost her voice. And he started working with her, and through trying to get her voice back, he came upon the discovery that what you speak or what you bring out as sounds depends on which micro muscles in your ears have been activated from your childhood. So if you are a child who has, like most Americans, only listened to American, it becomes very difficult for you to even understand or listen to differences, hear the different sounds that other languages make. Because your ears, those muscles have never been woken up. So, for instance, a kha is not something that they can ever hear. So they think they are producing what they hear, and they are, but they are not hearing what is actually being produced. So by working on those muscles for a particular language that you are learning, he had developed this entire course of 20 languages, and was also treating autism, cerebral palsy, and a whole host of medical issues using the same things, going through the micro muscles of the ear and attaching them to those parts of the brain which would then be activated to activate whatever it was that was causing attention deficit disorder, autism, bipolar, and so on. And it's only when I was actually writing for the book that I went into great in-depth study, bought the book. But now the only center in India has opened. It's in Auroville. And they at the moment only do the Tamil language, but they are treating a whole host of ailments and illnesses and mental disorders. So if you're interested, Auroville is the place to head for.
That's an amazing part of the book, because I did not even know such a thing exists. But there are parts of the mouth I use when I speak Malayalam. Sure. And
we in India are actually very fortunate, because most of us grew up speaking 3, if not 4 languages. So we have many more muscles that are awake and can therefore pick up languages much faster than people who come from a uni-language culture.
Yes, I was amazed when someone told me the Russian for no is nada, but it's pronounced nada in a way that is absolutely impossible for our mouth. So there is this whole motor aspect of language, which it's amazing. There's a whole
Malayalam is the Varaparam.
Varaparam, I know. And my husband's sitting here. He can't believe that a word like chini is panchasara in Malayalam. He just thinks, or urula karanga is alu. So yes. It is a very, very different language. So the other aspect of this book is towards the end, you're speaking about, how a mosquito derails you. And you also speak about how all that you believed for the first 5 decades of your life, and as a proud citizen of Ahmedabad, was completely upended. So these were 2 crises in your life, one of a crisis of your heart and your beliefs, and one a crisis caused by a mosquito. So I'm sure the former was the much harder test for you. So we'll speak about both, but about that February, March period of 2002. Your thoughts and how did it toughen you, if it did?
3 months ago, the Chief Minister of Telangana invited me to perform at the Ramappa temple in Warangal, which has just gotten World Heritage status from UNESCO. It's a Shiva temple, and it's the first heritage site in Telangana. And I was asked to come and perform something to Shiva. And I was to perform on the 21st of this month. On the 15th of this month, I was at the other Calcutta Book Fair, and I was asked a question, which was, what is the toughest times you have ever faced in your life? And I said, the toughest time is the time that I'm facing just now, when my idea of India is being destroyed every second. And I spoke about how, as somebody who is a Shakta, I'm very much a Shakta, and that I will not have somebody tell me how I can celebrate my goddess. It is a personal thing, it's a relationship between me and the goddess, and that I won't have somebody making rules and saying, this is what you can do, this is what you can eat, this is what you mustn't do, this is how you must follow the rules, because according to me, Sanatan Dharma has no rules. I also said that democracy is in a crisis just now. 24 hours after I made that statement, which was reported in many newspapers, the Minister of Culture, Government of India, under whom the ASI falls, called the government of Karnataka and said, you cannot have Mallika dancing there. She's a Modi critic, and I will not give you permission. This is 2 days ago. So the Telangana government, not Karnataka, Telangana government decided not to cancel the show, and we had the performance just outside the premises of the Ramappa temple. It was on the 21st, and there were 4,000 people there. If that is the case 20 years after I took up cudgels, you can imagine what the 20 years has been like.
Okay, so you've mentioned that your body is a result of several years of all the good things you've done among the bad things. And do you think your resilience is also part genetic and part all the good beliefs you have gathered, you've gathered life from across the globe thanks to your dance, thanks to your, growing up in a home like the one you had. So how do you feel that your coping mechanisms in the free fall of your idea of India has helped you?
Oh, I'm sure genetics has a part to play, but we see so many people who completely negate their genetics by letting themselves go, by letting the mouth overtake everything else. And people say to me, if there was one thing you had to say to others, what would you say? And I would say that, everything is replaceable except this. And this body and this mind are the only real things that are you. Nothing else. Even relationships can go. And you are the only mistress of this. You can do with it at any age what you want. And yet, that is the one thing we neglect the most. We just take it for granted, and yet nothing that you gain, no awards, no riches, no wealth, compares with the feeling of jumping out of bed in the morning, ready for anything that comes on. I promise you, there is nothing, and you can do it. Anybody with any ailment can do it. There are people who do yoga at 105. We can do it. It's in our hands. And why don't people do it? Because it really is the greatest gift that one can give oneself. Everything else one can cope with. But a body that aches and pains and is sick is the most difficult thing to deal with, because there's never a reality without it. There's never a minute's reality without it. Then grasp it today. Say, this is my temple. More than any other temple, this is my temple, and it is mine alone. And I will do it. Because that gift is something I owe myself, and with that gift, I can work towards bringing a smile to somebody else, of making a difference in somebody else's life, of being able to open a window to somebody else. And that's what life is about for me.
So now we'll come to, the moment you're saying you had this terrible bout of chikungunya, which completely ravaged your body. So what did that teach you? You mentioned an arrogance that you thought that you were in control. And
I think there are things one can control and work towards, and there are things one can't. And part of what you work towards is how to deal with those things you can't, and how to try and learn from them as well. So when I was writing this book, when everybody was getting terrible COVID, I got chikungunya. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with 4 dogs in my bed, completely unable to move, completely. I didn't have a phone close to me, but I could not move. And it took me 4 hours of crawling to my door to be able to open it, to let out the dogs and reach a phone. And over 11 months after that, it took me 11 months to get my body back to where I can dance, where I can move, and so on. And I was thinking, you've just written this book. It's not even out yet. And one mosquito can completely fell you. And I said to myself, is this just sheer arrogance that we think we can control our bodies? And I came to the conclusion that no, it's not. Because perhaps had I not been of the fitness level that I was, like so many people I know, they never recover from chikungunya. They have their joints hurting forever after. So I think that one has to be prepared in every way, mentally, emotionally, and physically, but also open for the fact that some mishap somewhere will happen that's completely out of your control, but that you need to be prepared for that as well, in the best way possible.
so before I throw it out to the audience, and you've written this book, and has that kind of made you taste ink or blood or whatever it is that makes one write? Another book in the works?
I've been asked to write my autobiography for years, except so many of the people involved in my life are still alive. So if I outlive them and they don't sue me, then I'll write it.
And what do your children have to say? What does Revanta have to say about your proposed idea of outliving everyone?
Oh, no. He's fine with, he thinks I'm so outrageous that I will say anything at any time and he'll be embarrassed and he'll recover.
Okay, so on that note, we'll take a few questions, and there's a gentleman right in front. We'll try and do what at our prologue Siddhartha Mukherjee said, man, woman, man, woman.
It's no longer a bipolar man-woman.
Actually, he said man, woman, other. You're right.
Yeah, Dr. Sarabhai, I met you at the other Lit Fest last week. Good to see you again, and I'm here again to see you. Your memoir, I confess I haven't read. And the thing is that the discussion was mostly on the diet, the food, and the health and all. But it's you who is the speaker, so I wasn't bored at all. But what I wanted to ask you is that your mother, Mrinalini Sarabhai, she took dance as a tool to social change, which you constantly speak everywhere you go. And much later because your mother took to dance when she was in her teens, and you took to dance much later, when you were in your early 20s or something. And you also followed the same path. So when Mrinalini Sarabhai worked on dowry or the Dalit killing and also the Silent Valley stuffs, and much later when you also worked on the feminist topics, whether it's from mythology or the contemporary and all, how much do you think that the India actually changed? Because there was a gap of, say, 30 years or 35 years when she was on stage and later on when you came to stage. So how much do you think, like when you say that the shocking thing is that your idea of India is destroying, it's for every one of us. So how much do you think that India actually changed and the acceptance and the rejection? Thank you.
I think we have regressed dramatically in the last 10 or 15 years. I think, unfortunately, today's circumstances and the fact of having the famous WhatsApp university makes hate much faster and much more rapidly spreading than love. Each of us has the dark and the light. And today's society's aggressiveness, violence, volatility, frustration makes us believe that it is the dark that we need to bring out in order just to survive. So when I started, for instance, in 90, doing something like Sita's Daughters, I thought after the first 500 performances in 10 years, I thought, okay, now I can lay it to rest. And in 2014, a lot of women who had seen it in the 90s said, Mallika, you have to revive it because our daughters are even more regressive than we were. And we thought we were regressive, but you have to revive it. Today, mythology is used in the worst sense to divide, to prove the supremacy of one caste over another, one gender over another, one color over another. And I think with the kind of interpretations to our mythology that exist, we need to bring up the alternate voice, not the subaltern voice, if you like. So a lot of my work has been in that field. We are in a situation today when no amount of dissent is allowed, when even questioning makes you a deshadrohi. We then, as artists, need to find a way of tackling that as well. There was a time when I could be confrontational, when I could throw down a gauntlet and say, this is what I believe in, and I think my truth is as valid as yours. Today, that is not the time. So as an artist, I have to find a way to say the same things, but say them differently, because they still need to be said. And our latest production, it's called The Conference of the Birds. It's on just now. I'm going back tomorrow to perform it. It's a 12th century Sufi poem that places all the existential questions in a group of birds who go looking for the meaning of life. And the main protagonist is a bird called the hoopoe, who goes to the other birds and says that surely life is about more than which grain I pick or which branch I sit on. It has to have a bigger meaning. And I believe that we have a king called the Simurgh, and we must go and find that, because otherwise if we don't have the truth, and we think that life is about which bus I can get or which apartment I can get or whether my child will get into this school, which are the questions we face today, we can't deal with life. It's meaningless. And so through this journey that the birds take over many, many years and many, many difficult situations, they finally get to the Simurgh, and they see that the Simurgh is themselves, it's a mirror, and that the journey should have been inside. And it is so true for where we are as a society today. And we are trying to show it to as many young people as possible, because the levels of mental depression and suicide amongst young people, because there's nobody answering these questions, there's nobody asking these questions. So we're trying to get to as many thousand people in Ahmedabad and Gujarat as we can. But through the birds, we are asking questions like, how safe is an autocrat? How powerful is power before it corrupts absolutely? What is the value of wealth? How much should we chase wealth? And these are questions that we should be asking, but neither the families nor the schools are asking, because we are too caught up in the red herrings that are offered to us. Oh, terrorist attack aa jayega. And if you just look at how many people die of terrorism and how many die on the roads in India, you can see obviously that is completely a red herring. Of course we must fight terrorism, but it's not what it's made out to be. So therefore one has to, as a performer, take this challenge and make things more and more relevant. I was in Hyderabad day before yesterday performing for the India Science Fair, which tries to popularize science. And like we did last year here, we had a session on the rocket boys, but we also showed a performance that my mother created some years ago, which is the history of Indian science through performance. And this was done in the last year before Kalam died. And Kalam said they should go to every school because children wouldn't be so frightened of science and maths if they were introduced to the subject like that. So that's another thing that needs to be done. Children need to be shown, because we know that the scientific temper in this country is going down very rapidly. So there are many challenges, and there are many different fronts at which one needs to work.
So this is one thing I also wanted to ask you. You know, this whole the arts and the sciences are seen as you know, not coexisting, with their two ends of a spectrum. So do you think that is, you are uniquely positioned, and many people like you should be kind of showing how these two meld together and have to coexist?
You know, it's very interesting. There was a recent survey done on Nobel Prize winners in the sciences. And 70%, I think, or 72% of all Nobel Prize winners in physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, and mathematics play an instrument or paint. So that's the answer.
Yes, I think this is something every student aspiring to go to Kota or joining all those institutes.
You know that for the last 15 years we've been talking of STEM. And now in most of the West, they have turned it into STEAM. So it's science, technology, maths, arts, and mathematics. Science, technology, engineering arts and management. So it's become STEAM. And in India, we've always had it, and we have systematically destroyed it over our new educational policy and what we consider the places to make engineers and doctors and lawyers.
Absolutely. Any more questions? There's a lady at the back.
There are two ladies.
There are two ladies, yes. We have to find a man between them to keep.
I don't think you need to, but hi. I just wanted to first thank you for your incredible bravery through all of these times. My question is a little more personal, which is so many of the conversations I have when I visit Kolkata is people obsessed with weight. Including my mother, whom I've had conversations with over many years. And I guess I'm asking for a reflection in this sort of connection between weight and health, and how do you have a reflection on that? Because at least in the West, thin means healthy, and everything else is unhealthy. And also as a dancer who came to it much later in life, there is a certain image of what dancers look like. Are you seeing any change in that? Because I don't think there's a relationship, or dance is only a particular body form. Are you seeing changes in that? Do you have any words of inspiration or encouragement, especially for somebody like me? Thank you.
I think weight, when it gets to the point of obesity, has a huge impact on everything from heart function to the amount of work that the kidneys have to do and so on. But per se, weight does not necessarily, being thin does not necessarily equate being healthy. A lot of thin people are very unhealthy. And I think what one needs to work towards is health, and to let the body find its optimum weight rather than the other way around. And the body has a way of finding its optimum levels. And one needs to start listening to the body. As far as dancers are concerned, I find that my generation of dancers, a lot of them started slim and comely as, the packaging matters. Whatever the product is, the packaging matters. And we know that. So they started off like that, and once they became famous, they just sort of... And I find dancers today are much more aware of fitness and much more aware of being fit. So a lot more are doing yoga, talking about doing yoga, swimming, and so on. And I think that is a huge change amongst dancers 40 and below, or 35 and below. And I think that's a healthy trend.
Okay. There's a lady here, yes.
Hello, ma'am. I'm an engineer myself, working in the field of social development and public policy, and a dancer as well. So your family has been a great inspiration to a lot of us. building upon what you just said to the answer to the gentleman, that there is a WhatsApp university, there is a post-truth analysis that we call today. There are a lot of things that you put in values or sense of empirical study that you put in, the efforts you put in with child. But what do you think is the best practical solution in the present era to deal with a country that is completely moving towards post-truth analysis by media also and sovereign also? Thank you, ma'am.
I think in one's life, one needs to decide whether one is going to live one's own script or the script of others. In India, a good 95% of people live the script scripted by their parents, by the larger family, or by the community. And I think that gives rise to tremendous frustration, anger, a sense of wanting to take revenge, and that's obviously not healthy. If one decides to find one's own script, because one has to first find it and then live it, that comes with tremendous sacrifices and hardships, but the joys far outweigh them. Because even if you take a wrong decision, it's your decision. I think laying out an ethical and a moral compass is part of that finding of your own script. If I break a traffic rule just because everybody is doing it, then I take away from myself the right to criticize. If I give a bribe or I take a bribe because I think the taxation system is wrong, then I take away from myself the ethical position of being able to point out that somebody else is doing wrong. The scripts that our families write for us have a community basis. हमारे जात में तो ऐसे नहीं करते. But that has nothing to do with actual ethics. It is what is allowed within that community. If it is a community that gives crores and crores to marry their daughter off, that is considered okay. And I think in today's world, we have to decide whether we want to question everything that is given to us in the WhatsApp university and in the hundreds of bhaktas, the millions of bhaktas who paint the world a particular way, or whether you want to question it. And I think that's a very personal decision. It's a decision that requires a great deal of courage, because it's much harder traveling inwards than traveling outwards. And it's up to you. But let me tell you that the joys of being able to look into your eyes in the mirror every morning and saying, I did not do anything consciously to hurt anybody, to screw anybody, is worth it.
I think that's a really beautiful note to end on, and what's really inspiring is whether you're traveling inwards like you have in parts of the book or outwards in other parts, you've traveled truthfully, which is such an inspiring thing to do. Thank you, Mallika.
Thank you very much.
Always a privilege to have you at the Kolkata Literary Meet. Absolutely delighted to be in conversation with you. Mallika will be signing books at the bookstore, which is just outside the East Gate. There's a little gate towards your right. She'll be there signing books, and you must pick up in free fall if you value honesty and integrity. Thank you, Mallika.